I thought I was just fixing her computer, but somewhere between her quiet laughter and the warmth of her hand guiding mine, I realized she didn't need my help with technology, she needed someone who saw her. I wasn't expecting her message that morning. Just a simple line on my phone, "Hey, could you take a look at my computer? It's been acting strange lately." It was from Claire. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since the last family gathering where she'd laughed at something I said and touched my arm in that easy, friendly way that stayed with me longer than it should have. I told her I'd come by that afternoon. She replied with a smiling emoji, and somehow that small thing made my stomach tighten. Her house sat on the edge of town, tucked between old maples that threw long shadows across the driveway. When she opened the door, the late sunlight framed her like something from a memory, soft hair falling over one shoulder, eyes calm but bright. She smiled in that effortless way that makes you feel seen. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I promise it's probably something simple. I'm just hopeless with these things." Her voice was warm, low, a little self-deprecating, and I could hear the faint music playing somewhere inside. Jazz, I think. The kind people play when they're used to their own company. She led me through the living room, everything neat but lived in, a few books on the coffee table, a half-finished cup of tea beside them. The scent of lavender drifted faintly from somewhere, maybe the candle burning on the shelf. Her study was small but full of light. Papers stacked neatly, photos on the wall, a younger woman with a teenage girl, probably her daughter, smiling by the sea. The laptop sat open on the desk, screen frozen mid-update. "It keeps doing this," she said, leaning close as if the proximity might help me understand. "I've tried restarting it, but it just stares back at me." I smiled. "They do that sometimes. Technology has moods too." That made her laugh, a small, honest sound that made the room feel lighter. She stepped aside for me to sit, but not far enough for me not to notice the faint brush of her sleeve against my arm. It wasn't intentional, but the warmth lingered. As I started typing, she stood just behind me, curious, watching over my shoulder. I could feel the faint shift of her breath each time she leaned closer. She wasn't doing it on purpose, she was just there, and I was suddenly too aware of how close. "Do you do this kind of thing often?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly design work. Computers are just a side thing." She hummed softly, thoughtful. "You always were good with your hands." I don't think she meant it the way it sounded, but the words hung between us, warm and slightly dangerous. She caught herself, smiled, and looked away. "I mean, good at fixing things." I nodded, pretending to focus on the keyboard, but my pulse had already changed. In that quiet, with the soft hum of the computer and her perfume curling faintly in the air, I realized something simple and unsettling: this wasn't just about a frozen laptop. Something else had started to move, something neither of us had named yet. The next hour unfolded in slow motion, the kind where every sound and movement feels a little louder, a little more deliberate than it should. Claire stood beside me as I worked, arms folded loosely, head tilted in quiet focus. The light from the window traced soft gold across her face, catching in her hair, the kind of detail that has no reason to matter and yet somehow does. She wasn't hovering, not exactly. Just close enough to notice. Close enough that I could feel when she shifted her weight, when her sleeve brushed my shoulder, when she leaned in slightly to see what I was doing. Each of those small things carried a pulse I couldn't quite ignore. "Is it fixable?" she asked, her voice half whispered, as though she didn't want to disturb something fragile in the air. "Yeah," I said, tapping the keys. "Just a software issue. It's taking a while to update." She exhaled, a small sound of relief that felt too intimate for such a simple thing. "You have no idea how grateful I am. I was ready to throw this thing out the window." I laughed. "That's one solution." Her smile lingered. "You don't say much, do you?" "I talk when there's something worth saying." She murmured, stepping a little closer, "then I'll take your silence as a compliment." It wasn't a flirtation, or maybe it was, but gentle, natural. The kind that happens when two people forget to guard their words. While the computer installed updates, I showed her how to navigate a few settings. She leaned in beside me, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the desk. I moved the mouse, explaining something she'd asked, but when I turned slightly, our shoulders brushed, a soft, fleeting contact that made my chest tighten. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You must think I'm ridiculous. All this for a frozen screen." "I think," I said carefully, "you just needed a reason to call someone." Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp, searching, then soft again. "Maybe you're right," she said after a pause. Something shifted then. The conversation slowed. She started asking about my work, my apartment, how long I'd been freelancing. Her questions were simple, but they carried attention, the kind that feels like sunlight on bare skin. At one point, she reached across to point at the screen, her fingers brushing the back of my hand. The contact was light, almost accidental, but it stayed in my nerves long after she pulled away. I pretended to keep talking about the program, but my voice faltered. She noticed. I could tell by the faint curve of her mouth, not teasing, just aware. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the laptop and the rain starting up again outside. Claire leaned just close enough for me to feel her presence, a calm, steady warmth beside me, and I realized something simple but dangerous: I wasn't just helping her anymore. I was watching her, and she was letting me. By the time the computer finished updating, the daylight had softened into the pale silver of early evening. Rain murmured against the window panes, steady, rhythmic, like it had no intention of stopping. The world outside blurred behind that thin veil of water, and inside her study, everything felt warmer, smaller, more private. I leaned back in the chair, waiting for the last progress bar to crawl across the screen. Claire handed me a mug of tea, chamomile, by the smell, and sat on the edge of the desk beside me. She didn't seem in a hurry for me to leave. "So," she said, taking a slow sip, "you're still doing that design work? I remember your mother saying you were good at it." "Trying to make it work," I said, smiling faintly. "Some days I feel like I'm getting somewhere. Other days," I trailed off, shrugging. "Other days you're fixing computers for neighbors," she finished for me, her tone playful but gentle. I laughed softly. "Pretty much, yeah." She looked down at her mug for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim. "I envy that," she said quietly. "Having something that's yours. Something you're still building." There was something behind her words, not envy exactly, but reflection. The kind that comes from looking backward instead of forward. "You built plenty," I said. "A career. A family." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "My daughter's in Paris now. She's happy, independent, and suddenly, this house feels too quiet." She wasn't fishing for pity, she was simply telling the truth. The kind that takes effort to speak aloud. "I didn't realize she'd moved so far," I said. "She wanted adventure." I couldn't say no. I think that's part of being a good parent, learning to be proud and lonely at the same time. Her words hung in the air, heavy but beautiful. I nodded, not sure what to say, afraid that too much sympathy might break the moment. The rain deepened, tapping softly on the glass. She looked out the window, then back at me. "What about you?" she asked. "Anyone waiting for you at home?" I shook my head. "Just my plants. And they're not great conversationalists." That earned a real laugh, low and warm. "You always did have a strange sense of humor." "Guess it's my way of filling quiet rooms," I said. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment. "You don't need to fill this one," she said softly. Something in that silence that followed felt like an understanding, unspoken, but real. The laptop chimed, pulling us both back. I turned to check the update, but my focus was gone. The screen glowed softly, reflecting both of us in its glass, her leaning slightly toward me, her eyes thoughtful, my hand resting near hers on the desk. The rain outside, her voice, the scent of tea, it all folded together into something still and delicate. For the first time that evening, I realized I wasn't just fixing her computer, I was learning the quiet language of her loneliness, and maybe, she was learning mine. The rain had softened to a whisper by the time I told her everything was fixed. The laptop was running smoothly now, no glitches, no frozen screens. The simple task I came for was done, but neither of us moved to end it. Claire leaned forward slightly, peering at the screen as I showed her the new settings. "Could you show me again how to move that file?" she asked, brow furrowed just enough to make the question seem innocent. "I always forget where to click." "Of course," I said, turning the screen toward her. "You just drag it here," but as she reached for the touchpad, her fingers hesitated midair, uncertain. "Sorry," she murmured, a small embarrassed smile curving her lips. "I swear this thing never does what I want." Without thinking, I reached over, covering her hand lightly with mine. "Here," I said quietly, guiding her fingers across the pad. "Like this." Her skin was warm, soft, and I could feel the subtle tremor of her hand beneath my own, not from fear, just awareness. Our joined fingers moved the cursor across the screen, and for a few suspended seconds, that small movement felt impossibly intimate. The computer clicked. A file shifted from one folder to another. But neither of us looked at the monitor. I could feel her eyes on me, and when I finally glanced up, she didn't look away. The faint light from the screen reflected in her gaze, turning it softer, almost fragile. "Like that?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. I swallowed. "Exactly like that." We both lingered there, hands still touching. The quiet stretched, full of something wordless, not tension exactly, but recognition. That gentle, dangerous pull that starts when two people realize the air between them has changed. Then she drew in a small breath, her lips parting as if to say something, but she didn't. She only looked at me for another heartbeat, then slowly eased her hand from beneath mine. "Thank you," she said finally, a little too softly. I nodded, but it took a moment before I could pull my hand back too. "You're welcome." The air felt heavier somehow. The soft hum of the laptop, the ticking of rain against the glass, even the faint scent of her perfume, everything seemed to press inward, closer. Claire brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and looked down at her lap, trying to steady the smile that threatened to give her away. "I guess I'm hopeless without you," she said. I smiled, trying to keep my voice light. "You're doing just fine." But the truth was, my pulse was still racing. There are moments when a room stops feeling like a room, when it becomes a space suspended between two people, balanced on silence, waiting for someone to move. That was where we were. Not crossing a line. Not speaking what we both felt humming beneath the surface. Just, close enough to feel the shift, to know it had already happened. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle, but inside, the air still felt charged, like the electricity hadn't found its way out yet. Claire sat back in her chair, her posture calm, her fingers folded loosely in her lap. But her eyes carried that same quiet uncertainty I felt in my chest. I pretended to check a few final settings on the laptop, though it didn't really need anything else. The work was done. The real reason I stayed was because neither of us had figured out how to end what was happening, or maybe we just didn't want to. "Everything's running perfectly now," I said finally. My voice came out softer than I meant it to. She nodded, glancing at the screen. "You really did fix it." Then, after a pause, "You always make things seem simple." Her tone wasn't about the computer anymore. I could feel that. It was about something else, maybe the ease between us, maybe the way I'd stepped into her quiet world for a few hours and rearranged its rhythm without meaning to. I smiled faintly. "It's not that complicated once you know where to look." She let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh, or maybe just an attempt to steady herself. You make it sound easy. It's not, I said before I could stop myself. Her gaze lifted to meet mine. For a moment, we just looked at each other, not searching, not testing, just seeing. There was something raw in her expression, something that made me feel both protective and completely unguarded at once. Then she looked away, breaking the spell. I should let you go, she said quietly. It's late. Yeah, I murmured, though neither of us moved. I began to pack up my things, the small bag, the charger, the flash drive. My hands felt clumsy, like every motion took effort. As I reached for my jacket, she stepped forward to hand it to me. Her fingers brushed mine, just a brief contact, nothing intentional, but enough to send a pulse through the space between us. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet, sincere. Not just for this. She gestured toward the computer. For staying. The words caught me off guard. You don't have to thank me, I said. Maybe not, she replied, but I want to. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came. The truth, that I didn't want to leave yet, felt too heavy, too fragile to say aloud. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, like the storm wasn't quite done. Claire moved toward the window, watching the light fade. Her reflection in the glass looked softer, lonelier somehow. When she turned back, her expression had steadied. Drive safe, okay, she said. I nodded, slipping the strap of my bag over my shoulder. I will. But as I walked toward the door, the echo of her voice, her touch, her quiet restraint, all of it stayed behind my ribs, humming like something unresolved. There are things people don't say because they're afraid to lose what silence still protects. That night, both of us understood that completely. By the time I reached for the door, the rain had turned fierce again, sheets of water hammering against the windows, wind pressing against the glass like it was trying to get in. Claire stood a few steps behind me, watching the storm with a soft frown. You're not driving in that, she said simply. I hesitated, glancing outside. The street beyond her front porch had vanished behind a curtain of rain. It'll pass soon, I said, though even I didn't believe it. She crossed her arms, the faintest smile playing on her lips. Stay until it does. I'll make tea. There was no room for argument in her tone, only quiet certainty. I nodded, setting my bag down again. All right. Just for a little while. She moved toward the kitchen, the click of her heels soft against the hardwood. I followed a moment later, drawn more by her presence than the offer of warmth. The kitchen light was dim, golden against the storm-gray windows. The kettle hissed gently as it came to life, and the air filled with the scent of black tea and honey. Do you always drink tea when it rains? I asked. She smiled over her shoulder. It's habit. My mother used to say storms sound less lonely when there's a kettle on. Something in that sentence lingered, less lonely. I sat at the table, watching her move. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the ease in her small gestures. There was grace in her quiet, the kind that comes from years of keeping busy when the heart is full of silence. She set 2 cups on the table, then joined me. For a while, we just listened to the storm. It was oddly comforting, the sound of rain filling the pauses where neither of us knew what to say. Eventually, she broke the silence. You're kind, she said softly. You didn't have to stay. I shook my head. You didn't have to ask. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, steady and searching. You remind me of something I used to be, she said after a moment. Before life got so managed. I wasn't sure how to respond. I only managed a quiet, what's that? Brave enough to start over, she said. The word settled between us like the warmth of the tea, slow, soothing, a little bit painful. She smiled, embarrassed by her own honesty. Ignore me. I get sentimental when it rains. I don't think that's something you need to apologize for, I said. Her laughter was soft, brief, and real. Then, without thinking, she reached across the table, fingers brushing the edge of my sleeve, just enough to keep me from looking away. "You've been easy to talk to," she murmured. For a moment, the storm outside was distant noise, the light in the room gentle and steady. Her touch stayed, barely there but enough to make the air hum between us. The kettle clicked again as it cooled, the sound small and final. Neither of us moved. Sometimes, connection doesn't arrive with grand declarations, it comes quietly, disguised as shelter from the rain. And sitting there with her, in that small golden kitchen, I realized that maybe neither of us had really wanted the storm to end. The storm finally began to fade. The sound of rain softened from a roar to a whisper, the steady rhythm that had wrapped around the evening now retreating into something gentle, almost wistful. The room felt different, quieter, lighter, but part of me wished it would last a little longer. Claire stood by the window, watching the last drops slide down the glass. Her reflection wavered in the pane, soft light outlining her face, her expression unreadable. I gathered my things slowly, half hoping she'd tell me to stay again, half afraid she would. "It's letting up," she said without turning. "Yeah," I murmured. "Looks like it." When she finally faced me, her smile was small but real, touched with something that felt like gratitude and maybe a hint of sadness. "Thank you again, for fixing the computer, for everything." I tried to answer lightly. "All in a day's work." But she didn't laugh. She took a step closer, then another, until she stood just in front of me. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume again, warm, elegant, something floral with a hint of spice. It reminded me of her exactly, composed on the surface, quietly alive underneath. "You know," she said softly, "it wasn't really about the computer tonight." I hesitated, searching her face. "I know." Her eyes lifted to mine, steady and open in a way they hadn't been all evening. "You're easy to talk to," she said. "It's been a long time since I've had someone just listen." There was nothing I could say that would have fit better than silence, so I didn't try. I just stood there, feeling the warmth of her presence filling the space between us. She reached out then, slowly, as if giving both of us time to change our minds. Her fingers brushed mine, a light, questioning touch, before slipping gently into my hand. Her skin was cool from the tea mug, but her palm warmed quickly against mine. The contact was simple, but it felt like the truth neither of us had dared to speak aloud all evening. "Thank you," she whispered again. "You fixed more than my computer." Her thumb moved slightly against my hand, a small, almost absent gesture, comforting, not asking for anything, just being there. I squeezed her hand in return, letting the moment settle without breaking it. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air through the open window smelled of wet earth and something clean, the scent that always follows a storm, like the world had taken a deep breath. Claire looked toward the door, then back at me. "Drive carefully," she said softly, her hand still in mine. "I will," I answered. "And, thank you for the tea." Her smile deepened, faint but genuine. "Anytime." When I finally stepped outside, the night air was cool against my skin, and I could still feel the warmth of her hand lingering in mine. Some moments don't need promises or words. They just stay, quiet, unspoken, and real. And as I walked to my car, I realized that what I'd helped her fix tonight wasn't measured in clicks or keystrokes. It was something simpler, something shared, the gentle way two people can find each other, even when neither of them was looking.